My name is Jeff Powell. I'm currently the county fire marshal in Shasta County. I started off my career in the construction trades and in the U.S. military as a framer and builder. From there, I went to college and I studied fire science and building inspection technology and combined what I knew about construction with fire prevention and fire operations. After college, I started going to work for various jurisdictions. I've worked for the city of South Lake Tahoe, the city of Chico, the city of Orland, the city of Arcata, Butte County, city of Santa Rosa Fire Department, and now the Shasta County Fire Department. I'm a ICC certified fire marshal and ICC certified building official. I've also worked as a building inspector, combination building inspector, and fire plans examiner and building plans examiner. The main difference between the inspectors and the plans examiners is that the plans examiners examine your plan submittals when you submit construction projects ahead of time to stamp your construction documents as approved, and then they're handed over to the inspector to make sure that they're inspected correctly. So, all right. So the Wildland-Urban Interface, just to keep it short, I'll probably be referring to it as WUI. The causes, we've seen these large fires throughout the state in recent decades. The different causes, climate change gets thrown out there a lot, whatever. That's debatable, in my opinion. Another logical explanation is population shifts from areas that didn't see human population, and now we do. Causes of wildland-urban interface: burns, direct flame impingement, radiant heat, and airborne burning embers has caused some dynamics to wildland firefighting that we didn't experience before, where it's not just vegetation that's burning, but buildings, hazmat, sheds that keep hazmat. You see those types of structures burn for a long time, weeks. They can smolder for weeks. And you see embers flying from those to other areas of the county, and it's added a complexity to these fires. So the goal of Wildland-Urban Interface code standards and vegetation management and clearance is to obviously harden homes and create a defensible space around these homes, kind of creating islands throughout your community where the fire can't pass through there and spread easily from vegetation to structures and vice versa, structures to vegetation. A lot of fire resources are dedicated towards structure protection. When there is a house there, you can dedicate an engine company and a water tender just to a house, as opposed to a more traditional wildfire where you send resources and you dedicate them towards the flanks of the fire and controlling the flanks while you catch up to the head. When you have structures threatened, you usually dedicate resources towards that, and if they're dedicated towards structure protection, they're not able to chase the fire down and put it out. Building code standards, Chapter 7A. This material is a little bit dry. I am going to go through it, but the construction materials that are allowed in the WUI is regulated by California Title 24, Chapter 7A, also known as the California Building Code. And then vegetation management, the other aspect of it, is California Public Resources Code 4291. It's the Shasta County Building Department's responsibility to enforce Chapter 7A and ensuring that contractors and homeowners use the correct building materials in the WUI. And it is CAL FIRE's responsibility, at least in the state responsibility area of Shasta County, Aaron's here today, to enforce vegetation management. So here's an overview of Shasta County. This solid red indicates very high fire severity zones throughout the county. The white is high fire severity zones, and then the non-colored is non-rated. Don't confuse all of these fire hydrants in Redding as part of the wildland, the very high fire severity zone. That's just a whole bunch of fire hydrants jammed together in the city. So we'll get into the different aspects of like what types of building materials and how to recognize them as compliant materials for installing in the Wildland-Urban Interface. There's exterior sidings, and there's a section in the code that talks about exterior wall coverings and what to look for a compliant material. Decking surfaces is a large one. I will be talking about that. I won't be talking about floor projections, and I'll be touching on windows briefly. All right, so we'll just dive right into Chapter 7A, and I'll read from it. It can be a little bit tedious, I guess, but I feel that it's important to go through it. This chapter applies to building materials, systems, and/or assemblies used in the exterior design and construction of new buildings located within the Wildland-Urban Interface. The purpose of this chapter is to establish minimum standards for the protection of life and property by increasing the ability of a building located in any fire hazard zone within the state responsibility area or any Wildland-Urban Interface fire area to resist the intrusion of flame or burning embers projected by a vegetation fire and contributes to the systematic reduction in conflagration losses. There are some exceptions for smaller buildings, so sheds that are located remotely from other buildings and under a certain square footage. Vegetation management compliance. Prior to the building permit final approval, the property shall be in compliance with vegetation management requirements prescribed in California Fire Code 4906, including California PRC 4291. So the way that the division of work has worked out in Shasta County anyway is that the building department enforces the materials for the building, ensuring that they're in compliance with WUI standards. Then my office inspects the vegetation management as a part of that construction inspection process. So the fire inspector will go out and look at the fire sprinklers and anything else, any other kind of fire protection systems that were built into the building. Then the building inspector looks at everything the building inspector looks at. And then my office also looks at the vegetation clearances while the building is under construction and prior to certificate of occupancy. After the certificate of occupancy is issued, then the building department's jurisdiction basically ends. It becomes private property at that point and no longer subject to inspections, except the Public Resources Code 4291 allows for periodic inspections after the building and the property is finalized to ensure that the vegetation clearance is maintained over the life of that property. And that's what other departments do. Exterior walls. Obviously, that's very important to Wildland-Urban Interface compliant materials. You can't have a highly combustible, small dimensioned wood covering your exterior walls, or else it's going to catch fire very easily. So through non-combustible material, whatever, metal siding, cement board, stucco, something like that. Ignition resistant material, that would be some kind of, probably a lot of things that would fall into that category would be some kind of material that is usually ignitable, but it's impregnated with some kind of fire retardant that keeps it from catching fire so easily. And then it seems a little bit counterproductive to have a lot of timber, like heavy timber, and the code defines that. I can't remember the definition exactly, but the least dimension can't be anything less than several inches. So heavy timber actually does pretty well in fire conditions. The science behind it is, kindling. That's how you start a fire, and that's how it becomes. That's how combustion is sustained. But if you ever try to set a large piece of wood on fire, it kind of smolders, but then it goes out on its own, and that's why heavy timber is up there. And then log wall construction, same concept there. You have your you have your log cabins, and those are oftentimes still there, and they don't require a whole lot of water to extinguish. Wall assemblies, those are going to be your walls that are constructed of, actually it's my next slide. So multiple layers of, this is probably the most common. So your standard type 5A stick built house. You've got 2x4 exterior walls, insulation, moisture barrier, sheetrock, and then some kind of exterior siding. And those, depending on which assembly you choose, there's a whole bunch of different types of wall assemblies that you can choose from. It determines the fire rating of it. Roofing. Roof shall comply with the requirements of Chapter 7A and Chapter 15. The assembly is installed in accordance with its listing and manufacturer's installation instructions. Bird stops shall be used at the eaves when the profile fits to prevent debris at the eave. Hip and ridge caps shall be mudded in to prevent intrusion of fire or embers. So whenever you have gaps between your roof covering and the deck underneath, you have to block those off so that the accumulation of vegetation or bird's nests or anything else can't get in there, or embers can't fly in there and start your roof deck on fire. So it doesn't do a whole lot of good if you have a Class A roof, like non-combustible shingles or tiles, if burning embers or combustible vegetation can accumulate underneath it and set your roof deck on fire anyway. And then the other part of that code section talks about having screened or you don't have to use this product. The code is written in a vague way so that it doesn't encourage the use of specific products like these gutter guards, but written in a way just so that the accumulation of combustible materials doesn't just sit in your gutters. All right, decking. The walking surface material of decks, porches, balconies, and stairs shall comply with the requirements of this section. The walking surface material of decks, porches, balconies, stairs shall comply with the requirements of this section when any portion of such surface is within 10 feet of the building. So, national listing agencies back, decades ago, there was one big player nationally that listed products, Underwriters Laboratories. I think everybody's heard of it. You could probably lift up any electronic device in here, and on the bottom of it, there'd be a UL stamp, meaning that it went through the national listing process and was tested for performance and safety as it relates to that particular product's purpose or what it's designed to do. So microwaves have to go through that process, and so does lumber. So lumber stamps, we're probably all familiar with those, right? So pretty much all of us have been to a job site where you've seen plywood or any kind of structural wallboard sheathing that has stamps on it. Your wall studs are either identified as Doug Fir number 1, 2, or structural select, and those look like this. Materials and material assemblies tested in accordance with the requirements of Section 703A shall bear an identification label showing the fire test results. The identification label shall be issued by a testing or inspection agency approved by the State Fire Marshal. They shall bear an identification mark of the approved testing inspection agency and the model number and the pre-test weathering specified in this chapter and compliance standards. So the last time I was a building inspector was about 8 years ago, and the way that it was then was that the codes hadn't caught up to the stamping process and the approval process for these fire rated stamps. So it made it a little bit difficult for the contractors and the homeowners and the inspectors to verify that the material did go through the national listing agency process. So yesterday I reached out to some of my colleagues in the building departments and the fire departments, and I didn't have a chance to talk to any contractors. Luckily we have one here today, and he can either confirm or deny, maybe confirm what I'm going to say. But from what I understand, the process is still the same, with the exception of like plywood and fire-rated windows and fire-rated wall assemblies. These stamps don't really exist on your, like on your composite construction materials, such as like a Trex or a fire-treated lumber boards. And the only way to verify that they have gone through that national listing process is that it would be on the manufacturer spec sheets for that product, or in the packaging material that that the construction material is wrapped in. Bob?
Yeah.
Bill? Can you verify that?
It's up to the contractor to make sure that all these products are that way, which isn't that hard to do now. You still have your grade stamps on all your material, your studs and whatnot, which is really up to the builder whether he wants to use a quality framing material or one that's better. It depends on what you can afford.
And, for the property owner to also do their own research and make sure that the materials that they want are the ones that get installed. The ones that they paid for are the ones that do get installed. So the testing process, there's these national listing agencies. I think we've all heard of Underwriters Laboratories, UL, but all of these national listing agencies are certified to list products in North America, in the United States. Intertech, I'm familiar with them. IAPMO, yes. Factory Mutual. Here's one from Intertech that I just kind of grabbed at random. And on their material data sheet, it identifies the fire test, the specific fire test that I think this was for a composite decking material of some kind, if I remember correctly. This is right out of the code on what fire standards, what like how much BTUs have to be subjected to the material for how much time and under what conditions. So there's independent third-party inspectors that are there during this process to make sure that the National Listing Agency does everything correctly, that the material is fed into these, or whatever. It could be a radiant heat test. It could be thrown into something like this, like an oven, or it could be a live fire test like that. And like I said, there's technicians there from the National Listing Agency who are performing it. And then there's third-party inspectors to make sure that all of the conditions are accurate and nobody's cheating. And the manufacturer of the product is the one who's paying for it all. Then, once you complete that process, then you go to whichever state you want to sell your product in, or the manufacturers of the product do. And in California, this is the process for that. You would go to the state fire marshal, not to be confused with the county fire marshal, which is what I do, but the California state fire marshal. You'll go through their process. You'll identify which national listing agency you already went through. The state fire marshal will do their own testing and verify. And a lot of times they'll send their own third-party inspectors to verify that the national listing agency process was accurately performed. And then once you go through all of that, then you'll get your product listed as California Fire Marshal approved. It'll bear this stamp on the manufacturer's material spec sheet, and a lot of times on the product itself will bear that stamp. And then you can go to the California State Fire Marshal website, and you can find either PDFs that you can print out with lists of decking or any kind of material that has been approved. There'd be a drop-down list. You click on that, and then you could pick from any number of about 50 different construction material types. From there, it would have a whole list of different manufacturers and types, so manufacturer and model of decking materials that bears the California State Fire Marshal stamp and approval for installation in the Wildland-Urban Interface. And here's an example of a typical, this particular one is Trex. But the manufacturers of this product went through the national listing process, and I highlighted the parts. So ASTM E84, test method for surface burning characteristics of burning materials. It has a flame spread index of a class B, and again, that's also here. And so, typically, what a good building plans examiner or fire plans examiner would do is they would, and this one was performed by the National Listing Agency for this was Intertech. So you would go to Intertech and you would find their list of materials that they have certified, and you would find this particular make and model of product hopefully on their list, so that then you could verify that the that the manufacturer's spec sheet wasn't just created by, somebody else. For Windows, I'm not going to dive into the code section and read directly from it, but there's multiple ways to get code compliant Windows. And your eaves. The eaves were specifically called out in Chapter 7A because of just the fact that heat and flame and gases are trapped under there, and it's a leading cause. If this isn't protected underneath your eave, then your house is not hardened at all. It's a good way, well, it's a bad way, whatever. But there's eave vents that are required by the building code to ventilate your attic, and that's an opening into your house. Also windows, but predominantly this eave area. There's two ways to construct an eave that I know of. There's you can either leave it open with your rafters exposed, or for primarily like aesthetic reasons, you can create a soffit there and hide all of that. And actually that gives it a higher level of fire protection because you don't have that exposed wood there. So you put some kind of fire rating product here, and you put some kind of rated eave vent to protect your attic, and those close down when subject to high heat and flame, and close that opening into your attic space, so your attic doesn't catch on fire. And also vice versa. If the fire starts inside the house, same concept. The room becomes fully involved, burns through your ceiling into your attic, and then is stopped from exiting out your eave, blowing out your that fire coming out of your eave vents, and setting your neighbor's property on fire also. Defensible space. I'll just touch on it briefly. You have your vegetation right up next to your house has to be more sparse and more alive. And as you get further out, it can be a little bit more dense, and you're allowed a little bit more dead or dry vegetation. And as you get further out, it can be even more and more dense and more dead. Yeah, okay. And that all comes from Public Resources Code 4291. And now I'm done.
Thank you very much. Thank you.